I didn't notice when we stopped showing up for each other. That's the part one keep returning to. Because if you ask me when we broke up, I honestly don't have an answer. There wasn't a conversation that ended things. No final argument. No moment where one of us said, "This isn't working anymore." If someone had asked me back then whether we were still together, I would have said yes without hesitation. And technically we were. We still lived in the same apartment. Still slept in the same bed. Still said good morning and good night. Still texted about groceries and schedules and whether one of us would be home late. Everything looked intact, which is probably why it took so long to understand what had already disappeared. We met in a way that felt unremarkable at the time. A mutual friend invited both of us to a small gathering after work. Not a party, just people sitting around someone's apartment talking about jobs and rent and plans nobody seemed certain about. I remember noticing how comfortable she looked in unfamiliar spaces. Some people perform when meeting new people. She didn't. She listened more than she spoke. Smiled quietly at conversations instead of trying to lead them. At one point I made a joke that wasn't especially funny, and she laughed anyway, but not politely. It surprised her too. She covered her mouth afterward like she hadn't meant to react that openly. That moment stayed with me. Not because it was romantic, because it felt real. We talked later while helping clean up empty glasses. Conversation moved easily, without pauses that needed rescuing. I didn't feel impressive around her. I felt understood before I'd said anything worth understanding. That felt rare. In the beginning, everything unfolded naturally. There was no decision to start dating. We just kept seeing each other again. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became weekends. Weekends turned into leaving things behind at each other's places on purpose. She told me everything then. Small frustrations from work. Thoughts she had while driving. Memories triggered by random songs. Sometimes she'd called just to say she forgot why she called. And we'd talk anyway. I didn't realize how meaningful that was. The willingness to share unfinished thoughts. Being included before something became polished. I liked knowing her reactions in real time. Liked that I was part of her day while it was still happening. And she seemed to want the same from me. I started narrating my life toward her without thinking. Something funny happens, you tell them. Something stressful, you tell them first. You begin measuring moments by whether they'll understand them later. That's when someone becomes central. Not during big milestones. During ordinary hours. Moving in together felt inevitable rather than exciting. We were already together constantly. Maintaining two apartments felt unnecessary. The place we found was small but warm. Thin walls. Street noise at night. A kitchen barely large enough for two people to stand comfortably. We argued lightly about furniture placement and laughed halfway through assembling shelves we never fully finished. Life stabilized quickly. Sunday groceries. Shared routines. Quiet evenings watching shows neither of us followed closely. I remember thinking how easy everything felt. No emotional chaos. No uncertainty. No fear of sudden loss. I thought calm meant success. I thought comfort meant permanence. Looking back now, I think comfort sometimes hides withdrawal better than conflict ever could. Nothing changed suddenly. That's important. If anything, we became better partners on paper. More considerate. More independent. Less demanding of each other's attention. At first, that felt mature. Healthy. She stopped texting throughout the day as much. Not intentionally. Just gradually. Instead of hearing about something when it happened, I'd hear about it later. Oh yeah, something weird happened this morning. Morning used to mean immediately. Now it meant sometime before. I told myself people get busy. Relationships settle. Constant communication isn't necessary once you're secure. That explanation worked for a long time. Until I realized I was learning about her life after it was already processed. I was receiving summaries instead of experiences. Evenings changed in subtle ways. We sat together but interacted less. Phones appeared between conversations. Silence became normal, not uncomfortable, just separate. I remember one night realizing we hadn't interrupted each other once. She used to stop mid-show to tell me a thought unrelated to anything happening on screen. A memory. A question. Something completely unnecessary. Those interruptions disappeared, and I didn't understand yet why that mattered so much. Interruptions mean someone thinks of you immediately, before filtering, before deciding whether something is worth sharing. When that stops, closeness shifts quietly. I adapted without noticing. I stopped sending small updates too. Stopped calling just to talk. You mirror emotional energy automatically. If someone shares less, eventually you do the same. Not resentment. Adjustment. We still cared, still functioned well together. Bills paid on time. Plans coordinated smoothly. Kindness remained. But emotional spontaneity faded. Love became efficient. And efficiency leaves very little room for presence. The realization didn't arrive dramatically. It happened on an ordinary weekday. I came home early. The apartment was empty. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, keys still in my hand. And a thought appeared without warning. If she didn't come home tonight, my evening would still look mostly the same. I hated thinking that. But it felt true. Not relief. Not sadness. Neutrality. And neutrality scared me more than anger ever could. Because it meant we were no longer essential to each other's emotional rhythm. After that, I noticed everything differently. How easily plans changed without discussion. How rarely we asked follow-up questions. How weekends passed without creating new memories. We were still together, but we weren't showing up emotionally anymore. We coexisted, supported each other, respected space, and slowly stopped reaching. I thought about saying something many times. But what would I say? You haven't done anything wrong, but I feel alone. That sounds unfair. So I stayed quiet. She did too. Eventually she spoke first. We were folding laundry. Completely ordinary moment. I feel like we're not really here anymore, she said. Relief hit me before sadness. Because I wasn't imagining it. We talked calmly. No blame. No accusations. Just two people describing absence. Neither of us knew when it started. Neither of us knew how to fix something that hadn't clearly broken. We didn't break up that night. We just acknowledged what already existed. After that, nothing changed immediately, which almost felt worse. We kept living together. Still kind. Still respectful. But awareness makes distance impossible to ignore. You start noticing every missed moment. Every silence. Every time conversation ends too easily. We stayed longer than we should have. Not out of denial. Out of habit. Leaving something functional feels irrational. Even when connection is gone. When she finally moved out, it happened gradually. Boxes over weekends. Less of her presence each time. The last day felt gentle. We hugged at the door. No dramatic goodbye. Just exhaustion. Two people accepting something neither caused. Afterward, life continued almost unchanged. That surprised me most. I expected devastation. Instead, I felt recognition. We hadn't ended suddenly. We had stopped showing up long before separating. I didn't miss arguments. Or routines. I missed being emotionally expected. Missed knowing someone was waiting to hear about my day before it was finished. Sometimes now, something small happens. A strange interaction. A passing thought. And I still feel the impulse to share it. That instinct hasn't disappeared. It just doesn't have a destination yet. And I think that's what I understand now. Relationships don't always end because people stop loving each other. Sometimes they end because presence quietly fades. Because attention drifts. Because two people begin living parallel lives while still sharing space. We didn't break up. We just stopped showing up. And by the time we noticed, there wasn't anything left to return to. I still think about us sometimes. Not with regret. Just curiosity. Trying to understand how something can remain peaceful and still end. How two people can care deeply and slowly become absent from each other's lives anyway. I don't think either of us meant for that to happen. But intention doesn't stop distance. Only attention does. And somewhere along the way, we stopped giving it. Quietly. Naturally. Until one day the relationship ended without ending at all. And life kept moving. Like it always does. Almost gently. Until eventually, there was nothing more to say about it. For a while after that, I kept trying to figure out when we stopped showing up. Not because I wanted to fix it anymore. Just because the absence of a clear ending made everything feel unfinished. When something ends loudly, memory organizes itself. You remember the fight, the last conversation, the moment you realized it was over. But ours didn't give me anything like that. So my mind kept returning to ordinary days. Small scenes. Moments that didn't seem important at the time. I remember how evenings used to feel early on. We'd come home tired, drop our bags somewhere near the door, and immediately start talking. Not sitting down first. Not changing clothes. Just talking while moving through the apartment. One of us cooking while the other leaned against the counter describing something that had happened hours earlier, but still felt urgent enough to share. Sometimes we talked over each other. Finished each other's sentences wrong. Corrected details that didn't matter. Those conversations weren't efficient. They wandered. And wandering meant we were still curious. Near the end, evenings became quieter. We'd come home, say hello, and then separate naturally into routines. She'd check emails. I'd scroll through something meaningless. Dinner happened later. Conversation happened after. And somehow, after never felt like the right time anymore. Nothing prevented us from talking. We just stopped beginning. I think that's what changed first. Initiation. Showing up emotionally often starts with small beginnings. A question asked without necessity. A thought shared before it's fully formed. Toward the end, everything waited for the right moment. And the right moment rarely comes. I noticed myself thinking things like, I'll tell her later. Then later passed. And eventually the thought didn't feel worth sharing anymore. Not because she wouldn't listen. Because I stopped assuming she needed to know. That realization came slowly. Painfully slow. There was one night I keep replaying. Nothing dramatic happened. We were sitting on opposite sides of the couch. A show playing quietly. She laughed at something on her phone. Real laughter. The kind she used to turn toward me with automatically. But this time she didn't look up. Didn't explain. Didn't share. And I didn't ask. That part matters. I didn't ask. Not out of resentment. Just absence of instinct. I remember noticing that in real time. Thinking, we would have talked about that before. And then letting the moment pass anyway. That might have been when I understood, though I didn't admit it yet, that we were already living separately inside the same room. After awareness arrives, everything feels slightly different. You start measuring silence. Not counting minutes. Just noticing weight. Silence used to feel shared. Later it felt individual. Two people resting beside each other instead of with each other. We weren't unhappy. That's still difficult to explain to people. There was no tension. No hostility. Just decreasing participation. Like both of us quietly stepping back at the same pace. I think staying became easier than leaving. Leaving requires certainty. And certainty never arrived. Every practical reason to stay still existed. We respected each other. Trusted each other. Functioned well together. But emotional presence can disappear while structure remains intact. And structure is convincing. It tells you everything is fine. So we continued. Long after curiosity faded. After she moved out, I kept noticing how many decisions no longer required discussion. What to eat. When to sleep. Where to go on weekends. At first it felt freeing. Then strangely empty. Because independence isn't the opposite of loneliness. Sometimes it reveals how much connection used to exist silently. I realized how often I used to imagine her reaction to things. A joke forming with her response already anticipated. An opinion shaped by knowing what she'd say. That internal dialogue disappeared gradually. And with it, a version of myself disappeared too. One afternoon months later, something small happened. I saw a dog struggling to carry a stick twice its size across the park. It was ridiculous. Exactly the kind of thing I would have texted her immediately years before. I smiled, reached for my phone, and stopped halfway. Not because I couldn't text her. Because the impulse ended naturally. There was no expectation anymore that she belonged inside that moment. That's when acceptance finally felt real. Not sadness. Completion. I don't think we stopped loving each other all at once. Love just stopped moving. Stopped reaching outward. Stopped updating itself. And love, without movement, becomes memory faster than people expect. We didn't break up because of conflict. We drifted until staying required less emotional effort than reconnecting. And eventually, even that effort felt unnecessary. Sometimes I wonder if relationships always contain this risk. Not betrayal, not incompatibility, but gradual emotional absence disguised as peace. It happens politely, kindly, almost invisibly. You keep caring. You just stop arriving for each other emotionally. And one day you realize you've both learned how to live without interruption. These days, I notice something different when I'm with people. I pay attention to beginnings. Who asks questions without needing answers? Who shares thoughts before deciding whether they're interesting? Who interrupts themselves just to include you? Those moments feel fragile now. Important in ways I didn't understand before. Because showing up isn't proven through grand gestures. It happens in ordinary attention, daily curiosity, the willingness to enter someone else's moment even when nothing demands it. I don't feel angry when I think about us anymore. Mostly grateful. We were kind to each other until the end. There's something peaceful about that. No damage to carry forward. Just understanding arriving slowly. We didn't fail. We just stopped showing up. And once that happens, relationships don't collapse. They fade into something familiar, then distant, then finished, without ever announcing the ending. Sometimes late at night, I still think about how quiet it all was. No final scene. No dramatic goodbye. Just two people gradually becoming less central to each other's lives. And maybe that's why it took so long to understand. Nothing forced recognition. Only time did. I was still there. So was she. But presence alone isn't connection. Showing up is. And somewhere along the way, we both stopped. Quietly. Naturally. Until life continued forward without needing either of us to notice the exact moment it happened. And eventually, I stopped trying to find it. After a while, I stopped asking myself why it happened. That question had followed me for months. On walks home, while making coffee, during those quiet stretches late at night, when your mind starts revisiting things you thought you already understood. At first, I needed an explanation. Something concrete. A mistake. A turning point. A moment where one of us could have done something differently. But the longer I sat with it, the more I realized there wasn't a single decision that changed us. It was accumulation. Or maybe erosion. I'm still not sure which word fits better. I started remembering how often we used to check in without realizing we were doing it. Not serious conversations. Just small acknowledgments. She'd walk into a room and immediately look for me. Not intentionally. Just instinct. And I'd do the same. There's comfort in being located like that. In knowing someone's awareness adjusts slightly when you enter or leave a space. Near the end, we stopped tracking each other. I'd come home, and she wouldn't notice right away. She'd leave early, and I'd realize hours later. Not neglect. Just independence growing quietly where attention used to live. At the time, I told myself it meant trust. Now I think it meant we had learned how to exist separately again. One thing I rarely admitted, even to myself, was how relieved I sometimes felt toward the end. Not relieved to lose her. Relieved to stop trying to feel something that no longer arrived naturally. Because once you notice distance, you start performing closeness. You ask questions you think you should ask. You initiate affection carefully. You monitor tone. And performance is exhausting when both people feel it. I think we both sensed that effort. Neither of us said it out loud. But conversations became gentler. Safer. Almost protective. Like we were preserving peace instead of rebuilding connection. There was a Sunday morning near the end I think about often. We were both awake. Sunlight coming through the window. Coffee already made. The kind of morning that used to stretch comfortably for hours. She sat at the table scrolling through something. I sat across from her doing the same. No tension. No argument waiting underneath. Just quiet. And suddenly I realized we hadn't spoken in nearly 20 minutes. Not because anything was wrong. Because nothing felt necessary to say. That realization landed softly. Almost politely. We had stopped being curious about each other's internal worlds. And curiosity is what makes presence feel alive. Without it, togetherness becomes proximity. After the breakup, people asked what happened. I never knew how to answer. There wasn't a big reason, I'd say, which never satisfied anyone. People want conflict. They want a story with momentum. But ours ended the way many things actually do. Gradually. Without villains. Without failure. Just momentum slowing until movement stopped entirely. Time passed. Long enough that daily life stopped referencing her automatically. I rearranged furniture. Changed routines. Found new coffee places. None of it symbolic. Just adjustment happening quietly. And one evening, months later, I noticed something unexpected. I felt present again. Not happier exactly. Just engaged. A conversation with a stranger lasted longer than necessary. I laughed without thinking about sharing it afterward. Moments felt self-contained instead of waiting for validation. That surprised me, because I realized how long I'd been living slightly detached near the end of us. I think relationships shape how we experience time. When you're deeply connected, moments feel shared even when you're apart. Toward the end, time became individual again. Separate days. Separate emotional timelines. We still loved each other, but we were no longer participating in the same experience. And love alone wasn't enough to bridge that gap. I saw her once more after that accidental cafe meeting. From a distance this time. Across the street. She was talking to someone, animated, laughing in that familiar way. I didn't approach. Not out of avoidance. There just wasn't anything unfinished between us. Watching her, I felt something unexpected. Not jealousy. Not longing. Recognition. She looked fully present in her life. And I realized I probably looked the same in mine. We hadn't abandoned each other. We had simply continued forward separately. That understanding softened something in me. For a long time, I feared becoming unimportant meant I had failed somehow. That I should have been more interesting. More attentive. more necessary. But importance isn't secured permanently. It exists only while two people keep turning toward each other. Once turning stops, importance fades naturally. Not cruelly, just quietly. Now, when I sit with someone and conversation flows without effort, I notice it immediately. When someone tells me something small, unfinished, unnecessary, I recognize the trust inside it. Those moments feel fragile now, temporary, but meaningful precisely because they aren't guaranteed. I don't assume permanence anymore. I pay attention instead. Sometimes late at night, I still think about how gentle our ending was. No explosion, no irreversible damage. Just two people slowly reclaiming their individual lives while still sharing space. And maybe that's why it took so long to accept. Nothing forced grief. Understanding arrived gradually. Like realizing a room has grown quieter long after the music stopped. We didn't break up in the way people expect. We just stopped showing up, stopped interrupting, stopped reaching, stopped assuming the other person needed to be included in every ordinary moment. And once those small arrivals disappear, everything else follows naturally. I was still there. So was she. But presence isn't what sustains connection. Participation is. And somewhere along the way, without anger, without intention, without even noticing, we both stepped back at the same time, until life continued smoothly, without requiring either of us to step forward again. And eventually, that felt normal. So normal that I stopped searching for the exact moment it happened. Because maybe there wasn't one. Maybe endings like ours don't occur at a point in time. They unfold quietly, until one day you realize you're already living after them. And there's nothing left to add. Only the understanding that showing up, really showing up, is something you only recognize once it's gone.